Today, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Swan Private. Now, you know from listening to this show that our money is broken. Fortunately, we have Bitcoin, a better money that will help us build a brighter future. But if you don't have a Bitcoin strategy and a trusted partner to help you execute that strategy, then you're probably going to fall behind. Now, I've known the Swan Bitcoin team for years. The Bitcoiners at Swan are mission-driven and have deep expertise and respect in the Bitcoin space. In my opinion, this is the team you want on your side. Today, I'd like to highlight Swan's Private Client Services division, which guides high net worth individuals and businesses around the world toward building and preserving wealth with Bitcoin. So visit swanprivate.com and learn how this concierge service gives you direct access to your dedicated Bitcoin advisor by phone, messaging, and email. Swan will guide you on complex areas such as self-custody, or you can choose to hold your Bitcoin through Swan with one of the largest US-regulated custodians. So, make your first purchase with Swan Private and get $100 of Bitcoin. Just tell them that I sent you. You know, an opportunity like this to build and preserve legacy-impacting wealth for your family and company will not likely be seen again in our lifetimes. Sign up at swanprivate.com today, mention Breed Love to your advisor, and get $100 in free Bitcoin when you make your first buy.
Larry Lepard, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you. We've exchanged quite a few communications on Twitter. I've been talking about doing this for a while.
Yeah.
Really excited to have you in person. This is actually the first set of live or in-person interviews rather that I've done. So I'm honored to have you here.
Likewise, it's going to be a great show.
Going to be a great show. And I figured given your background and deep knowledge on the topic and the namesake of the show, why don't we just start with a big question? What is money?
Yeah. So money is the most liquid good. It's what we all decide to, it's a price signal that tells us what things are worth, what things are relatively worth, labor, goods, commodities, etc. It is the one good that is the most liquid by definition. Most people accept and understand its value. And it's what's kind of agreed upon by the marketplace. Although that hasn't always been the case. Fiat money is the most liquid good that government by fiat decrees as money. And of course, pre-fiat money, the most liquid good was generally speaking gold, although there were times in pre-gold era when, you know, seashells and cattle and wheat and horses and other things were money, because you could trade them. But that was really a sophisticated form of barter. And the precious metals really kind of emerged as money in the early days, and you know, the Sumerians and the Egyptians, et cetera, and it kind of continued through the Renaissance and so forth. And so until Bitcoin was invented, the soundest form of money in the world were the precious metals, gold and silver. And I run a fund which focuses on those two forms of money and the miners that produce those. But Bitcoin came along in 2008 and shook that all up. Created a better form of money and making me somewhat obsolete in my old business. But I'm morphing my old business into this new business.
So that's a good answer to the question, what is money? How did we get to gold though? Like there have to be certain properties or characteristics to this technology we call money that people are seeking.
Correct.
That gold fulfilled, presumably. So like, what are
durable,
those?
fungible, divisible. You know, it was scarce, obviously. Gold is mined every year, and the world supply is growing at 1.7% a year. It's about the same rate that Bitcoin's growing before the next halfening occurs. You know, it had the properties that made it money. It was small enough and scarce enough that one could carry a fair amount of value in a small unit. You know, the Roman denarius, Roman soldier was paid, you know, 2 denarii a year, which was a very small coin, about the size of a quarter.
Right.
That was an annual year's wages, which is in part why silver also became money, because it's kind of hard to divide up half of your year's wages in one coin.
Right.
And so silver, which was more plentiful, the ratio of the two in the Earth's crust is about 16 to 1. Silver became another form of money. And throughout time, you know, as you might imagine, various countries made various bets on which was the better form, and India and China made the wrong call on that in the 1800s. But in many cases, what happened was gold became the money for capital transactions, and silver became the money for day-to-day transactions. So you bought something big using gold because you could store a lot of value in a very small unit. And then when you went to buy smaller things, you had silver coins, which had some ratio in their value to the gold that was there. So I think that just the durability, I mean, the silver will tarnish, but generally speaking, the durability of the precious metals and the scarcity, the relative scarcity of them is what made them money. I mean, there were times, for example, when the Spanish, founded the New World and raided all the Inca silver, that, there was enormous inflation because there was a large supply of silver brought into the money supply in Western Europe. But in general, gold and silver did a pretty good job of holding a stable value over a period of time. And that's a big piece of what money is expected to do. I mean, if money isn't stable, if it doesn't maintain some purchasing power or some stable value relative to the things that you purchase with money, and you only hold money because you want to buy goods and services in the future, then it's by definition bad money. It's losing its value. And gold and silver did a pretty good job of maintaining value when there was no other alternative.
Gotcha. So then the migration to gold as money, this went hand in hand with the development of civilization, presumably.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are Sumerian records from, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 BC when, gold was used as money. And obviously the Egyptians valued it. It was in many of the tombs. And, I think the first real gold coinage that I'm aware of, I guess there were cases of it in Athens and Greece as well, but the first famous gold coin was the florin, which was, the coin that, and the ducat, which became the two coins in Renaissance Italy in 1400s. And so those became kind of universally recognized as a gold coin and having value. And of course there were many other coins that came after that, British sovereign, et cetera. So it did go hand in hand with developing civilization. And just as trade in and of itself, increased civilization. I mean, we all started off as hunter-gatherers and living in tribes, and just, we had ledgers back then too. I killed a bison, mark it on the wall, you owe me one. The early form of Bitcoin, right?
Right.
And then, and gold hadn't been discovered probably at that point in time. So, but over time, I think mankind figured out that it was a scarce, beautiful metal, and therefore, we valued it.
Yeah, that makes sense. This idea of stability, like stability and value, though, I agree with you. Like money, that's one of the purposes it's serving, right? Is something to denominate trade in, something to actually think in, so we can think about trade and whatnot. But this was also used as kind of like an attack vector on money by central banking, and that's at least part of the ostensible purpose for central banking controlling the money is to make it stable. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, now we're jumping a bunch of centuries forward, but yes, we've gone way forward. I mean, it was kind of used even as an attack vector inadvertently a little earlier when it was demonetized, in Britain, and that caused great pain for the Chinese and the Indians who had bet on silver versus gold. And, the British Empire adopted the gold standard. But yes, it certainly, as central banking arose, and as credit grew through a sophisticated credit network where banks could fractionally reserve lend against gold deposits, money became a lot more squishy. I mean, originally, even originally when the original gold banks and goldsmiths, kind of started the trend toward fiat. I mean, I think in the early days there weren't bankers, so to speak, and you literally had to present a coin to get the goods, and that was that. Somewhere along the line, somebody who was very smart figured out that we can create a gold bank, and why don't you leave your coins with me, and I promise I'll give them back to you, and then I'll lend out against them. And of course, pretty soon they started making loans against coins they didn't have, and they had a fractional reserve gold system. And so, that in and of itself was an early birth of fiat, which, went to much, much greater depths as we slowly but surely gold, totally left the picture, right? Yeah. So 71, it left the picture altogether. So,
right.
But yes, the central banks have definitely used fiat currency as an attack vector. There's no doubt about that, to harm people and to maintain their control. I mean, there's there's no coincidence that the system we have is incredibly unfair to the working man, and that's because the people at the top of the system we have rigged it in their favor. Yeah, very clearly.
Right. Absolutely. Is it? I mean, is it a lack of just education about money that allows the working man to be victimized by?
No, because there are some working men who are, quite aware of it. I mean, I think it might be that, yes, that's a piece of it, okay, but that's not all of it. It's also, I mean, that's like asking if somebody's a prisoner, is it their fault that they're a prisoner?
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, these guys created the prism and they run the propaganda machine and they, they make it hard and they manipulate the price of the metals and they do all these other things that, it takes quite a lot of personal strength and integrity to recognize how wrong it is and to fight back against it. And more people are. And the system, as they've constituted it, will fail. I strongly believe that.
Yeah.
But it's and Bitcoin is like the sharpest spear in the toolkit, right? I mean, it's fabulous.
Right.
And so their system's going to fail, but it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a certain amount of awareness, and that's really what we're fighting for right now. And I was very encouraged to hear Brian talk about 25% adoption, in your prior interview.
Yeah.
I mean, if we really are at 25% Bitcoin adoption, that's fabulous. That's really a good thing.
Yeah, that was a massive number. I didn't think it was that high.
I didn't either. Yeah.
I thought the numbers I'd heard previously were like sub 10%.
I thought it was around 10.
Yeah.
They're both good numbers.
So, okay, we're hunters and gatherers. We start to trade. Money emerges from the process of trade as the most liquid good, I think is what you said.
Right.
We settle on gold as being that most liquid good because it exhibits certain properties that we seek in money. Right. But there's this process, I think you call it betting on, right? What I typically call is a game theoretic process. So people are saying, let's try this as money, let's try that as money. Sure. And then these economic networks are competing with one another, and some monies emerge victorious, others fail.
Right.
And through that iterative process over time, we like zero in on gold as the best money.
I think that's right. I think that's what happened. I mean, I'm sure there were grain-based monies and there are other forms of money, but cattle, et cetera. But how do you make a fractional payment?
Right.
And there were ledgers, I'm sure, and so on and so forth. I mean, but again, for day-to-day transactions, you need pricing and you need something to trade for those prices. I mean, obviously, lots of things have been money. I mean, in jails, cigarettes are money, right?
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
So.
Yeah, again, because they have certain properties, right? Like
right.
Scarcity, divisibility, fungibility.
Exactly.
Things. So, I mean, that's a key point, I guess, is that trade is something that's innately human.
Right.
We trade with one another.
Right.
Money emerges as the most tradable thing, basically. Right. It's not government created nor enforced.
It can be.
In a natural world.
In a natural world, it's not. Right.
Yeah.
There is no government per se. Yeah.
So what took us across the chasm from, say, something like from a gold standard, wherever it may have emerged, to central planning of money?
Yeah, there are a lot of steps. I mean, the first one was fractional reserve gold through, gold lending houses and that whole thing, and that led to banking and fractional reserve banking. But recognizing that the risks inherent in all of that, there was always a gold backing to paper. I mean, the Chinese tried paper money, in the 4th and 5th century, and it failed miserably because they printed way too much of it. So, there were fiat experiments long ago, and there's a fiat experiment at the beginning of this country, in the United States. I mean, the Continental was used to finance the Revolutionary War, and the saying it became worthless as a Continental is very well known, and that's because they had hyperinflation, which is, by the way, why in 1789, when they drafted the Constitution, it said only gold and silver could be money. I mean, they knew the risks of hyperinflation. So, so what happened then is we kind of evolved over time, right? I mean, the U.S. started off on a gold standard, and there was fractional reserve banking, and we slightly broke the gold standard with the greenback in the Civil War. We were interesting to note that we have a war. How the hell are you going to pay for it, right? Well, Lincoln introduces greenbacks and prints them to pay for the war, and then they got depreciated substantially, and so there are different clues that show you that they were having a hard time maintaining a gold standard, but they more or less did it until the Federal Reserve came along and the Federal Reserve. And so what you had is an era of free banking, an era of competing currencies. And at the base of it all was gold. I mean, and even J.P. Morgan, who was the titan financier of his day, said that, gold is money, everything else is credit. And he was right. But what happened is that a lot of credit got built up because the banks got bigger and bigger. And so, but at the base of that all was gold. Exeter's pyramid, gold was at the bottom. I mean, today Bitcoin would be at the bottom. But, what you're looking at is over time, that all began to slip. And so in 1913, they created the central bank, which was really a cartel for the banks, to protect them and protect the lender of last resort. And, their charter was just to prevent bank panics, and there had been many throughout the 1800s. As you might imagine, people would mismanage a bank. They'd get out over their skis. The bank would fail, and there'd be a very sharp business contraction. But generally, it was quite quick, and it would resolve itself, and things would go on. I mean, if you look at the period of time from 1789 to 1913, I mean, that's probably the largest period of average growth in human standards in the history of the world. I mean, people, in the early 1700s, 1800s, we were agrarian dirt farmers. Yeah. And by 1913, we had a modern, semi-modern industrialized economy, and everyone's lifestyle had gone up enormously during that time frame. Yeah. And we were on the gold standard the entire time. We didn't need a central bank. Yeah. We didn't need fiat money. The money was backed by gold. The banks were, sometimes not credit worthy. That was the fractional reserve problem. But they set out and they established the Federal Reserve in 1913, and then 2 years into it, and they said they were only going to back against good credit for short periods of time at very high rates. And within 3 years, they broke that rule, and they printed money to finance World War I. And then they had a brief depression in 1920, and they didn't like that, and so they printed more money, and they created the 1929 bubble. And of course, that blew up, because it was really egregious. People were able to borrow 90% of the value of a stock, and so they were kiting stocks to the moon. And when that blew up, we had the Great Depression. And unfortunately, the statists in our world interpreted the Great Depression in a manner that was favorable to them and gave them more power. Of course. They said it was the gold standard that caused it, when in fact, what caused the Great Depression was the Federal Reserve and the excess credit that it allowed and encouraged to build post-World War I and during the 20s. And so if we, no boom, no bust, we had an enormous boom. And so as you might expect, we had an enormous bust. Yeah. And they said, oh, that's the gold standard. And of course, they grabbed the gold. They revalued the gold downward 70%. And it was a very long time recovering. And in fact, we had to really enter a war and slaughter 50 million people to recover. And the war was financed by money printing and financial repression. So the whole money printing thing is just a morally evil thing. I mean, it's, the Bible says this, the Constitution says this. I mean, if you have control of the monetary medium, you can control the populace. You can make yourself rich. I mean, Baron von Rothschild said it, famously. He said, give me control of the money. I don't care who makes the laws. Right. Right. Yeah. And that's what happened. I mean, we let a bunch of greedy bankers get control of our monetary system, and we've never gotten it back from them. And, therefore, average people make today what they made in 1971, and yet everything costs multiples more. Yeah. And they've squeezed the lower class, and they've created quintillionaires of the people at the top who are just insanely rich, as a result of being able to shuffle paper. Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's really pretty bad, as you know. Yeah, as we all know, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're fighting it. Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way you put that, as like just shuffling papers. They're getting rich through confiscation ultimately, right? It's they're taking 10% of everybody else's wealth every year. Yeah. It goes in their pocket. I mean, here's what I like to think. Think about all the productivity improvements we've had in the last 20, 30 years, the PC. I mean, just all the world has gotten so much more efficient. We can communicate with each other. We can, just the spreadsheet. I mean, we keep track of things. It's fabulous. I mean, what the PC and the internet, what the microprocessor revolution has done to the world is stunning. Yes. We all should be working 20 hours a week and be rich. Right. But in fact, what's happened is we're not. We're all working harder. Yeah. And it's because all the wealth has been skimmed off at the top. Right. Right. Exactly. That's how Jeff Bezos is worth $80 billion. Or Steve Ballmer is worth $80 billion. Yeah. Or Jamie Dimon is a billionaire for basically being a banker. I mean, it's It's because the distribution of the productivity gains has not been in anything close to being equal.
Right.
I mean, the 70s, a CEO would make 25 times what their average employee made. Now the average CEO makes 500 times what their average employee makes. It's ridiculous.
Staggering.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just upside down.
And that's the proper way to frame it. I often say that inflation is used to harvest the economic surplus.
Yes.
Right. And so, because it's a debt-based structure, like you have to have inflation of the money supply to erode the debt.
Right. Well, that's the thing.
But that only works so long as there's real productivity growth. And we've had a lot of that through globalization, digitization.
Right.
But that comes to an end at some point, right? It's the parasite aggressing against the host.
A little bit. I mean, I'm not sure exactly totally where you're going there, but a little bit of it is that, look, we've got, and this is one of the great flaws in Keynesianism in my view, we've got a planet with a fixed amount of resources, fixed size. Now, we can get more efficient at using those resources, but we don't get another planet. This is it, right? And we're destroying it in some ways. The Keynesian notion that growth at any cost is always a good thing, it's just an incredibly broken and flawed notion. I mean, and Jeff Booth is the best at pointing this out in his book. I mean, we don't need top line growth. We don't need higher prices. We don't need, quote unquote, more of everything. What we need is more for less, which is what deflation is. Yeah. And so the Keynesian model was built on an inflationary, concentrate all the power in a central authority. Just like we did in World War II, we had the central authority that was really good at killing 50 million people. Right? We need to decentralize because I don't think there's anybody in the world that really wants to go kill a bunch of other people. Right. I mean, and yet we've still got central authorities playing these games where people are dying as a result of wars that shouldn't be fought. And, they're being fought because of the fake money.
So let me ask you this. This is something I think about a lot is it avoidable? Let's just hypothetically say that we live in the United States and everyone here is a libertarian and we love the gold standard and we don't want to abandon it at any cost. But then say there's some belligerent nation, whoever, and they choose to take the opposite tact. They just want to print as much money as necessary to go to war. Is there a game theory then that sort of forces the hand of us as the libertarian nation? Like if they're printing money to fund war, their balance sheet or their war chest is necessarily much larger than ours. So it's like we either print money or we lose to them in combat. Is that accurate?
That's a great question. I mean, I guess it in part depends upon what kind of resources they have and who's financing the printing. Yeah. I mean, they can print money, but, and where we're going with this is reserve currency status, but they can print money, but if they need anything from the outside world, that money's not going to have any value if they're printing too much of it. Right. Unless they are the worldwide reserve currency. Yeah. So I don't really worry too much about that thing. I will say that I think it is naive to think that we can go to a situation where we can't have some sort of defensive measures and we can't be watching the world carefully to make sure that nobody is, as an example, acquiring nuclear weapons. I mean, I think we should go to a total nuclear non-proliferation, and really, it should be kind of a war against, a crime against humanity for developing any nuclear weapons on a go-forward basis. Right. And we should try and figure out a way for the world to police that. But I mean, this is all, several steps down the road once this fiat system is blown up, and we're a bunch of smaller nations where, nobody's trying to take over anybody else. I mean.
Yeah, so the reason I asked that question is because if that is the case, then you almost become like the craziest neighbor almost sets the standard for everyone else, right? If they're willing to print money and go to war, then you almost force the hand of other nations to do the same, otherwise be defeated. And so because a lot of the different ways I've come at this intellectually, looking at history of money and whatnot, it's like we really need Bitcoin as a species to stop repeating this pattern of blowing each other up every few generations.
Well, I completely agree with that statement. I mean, take North Korea as an example. I mean, will there be rogue countries? Very possibly. But, how are they going to fare? Right. And, I mean, it really, the only way that a rogue country, I think, can mess up the world is if they have a nuke. I think otherwise that form of organization just isn't going to work. Right. And isn't going to be much of a military threat to even a normally armed country. But it's an interesting question, the game theory of if you have one crazy who is printing money, how does the rest of the world deal with that?
Yeah.
I mean, we're so far away from that right now because the whole world is printing money.
Right. I know.
But it's something I hadn't really pondered much, and I should think more about it because it is an interesting question. What if somebody takes the other side of the bet?
Do you think those things go hand in hand then? The printing of money and this manifestation of what I call mass psychosis.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
all the things here, right? Like gender fluidity.
Yep.
The idea of imposing your opinions on others. The religious like reverence for certain political people in political power.
Yeah.
Or people were worshiping Fauci for a while here in the U.S. The idea of mandates, like we just go off the rails.
I generally speaking try to avoid a lot of political stuff just because I love humanity and I don't want anyone on any side to hate me for my politics. But I will say this: I think that statism, the general theme of statism, is a very dangerous theme. I'm very much a libertarian. I'm very much a Christian. I very much believe in individual responsibility, and I think there are a lot of people in the world, sadly, who would rather delegate their agency to some state that makes them feel good, and they never really know exactly what that state is all about. And that state can commit enormous evil in their name. And I don't think they would knowingly support that, but they get sucked into it. And so all of these different issues, to me, come out of reverence for the state and not thinking like an individual.
Right.
I mean, I have a personal trainer who I lift weights with, and he says, war is the sex organ of the state.
Yeah.
I mean, the state loves and keeping you afraid and fighting amongst yourself and saying red, blue and saying vax, no. All this stuff, to me, is to keep us distracted from the real issue, which is that the top 10% is trying to control our lives and rob us blind.
Right.
Right? I mean, to me, that's the issue, right? And they need to go down. I mean, if we want to stop slaughtering 3 million rice, farmers in Vietnam, which we did because Henry Kissinger had a domino theory, okay? If we want to stop, these kinds of wars that we do, if we want to stop going into Iraq, on a false pretense and creating an aggressive war that was a crime under the Nuremberg standards, it's interesting to me to hear, so many in the American political sphere call Putin a war criminal, and perhaps he is. I mean, he is, okay, fine. But if that's the case, maybe we should examine some of our own behavior, looking backwards. And so, to me, what's going on here that's criminal is this worship of the state and this belief that the state is all powerful and it's a useful entity. I don't think we need it. I think we can decentralize. I mean, there was a great quote on Twitter today. Somebody said, we reached a peak blow-off point in centralization, in mass centralization. I think that's true. Right. It's failing at every single level. Yeah. The money's failing, the politics are failing, the war stuff is failing. Yeah. I mean, you name it. The commodities, the prices are failing, the inflation is a big deal. It's all failing. Yeah. And to me, bring it on. I mean, it's sad to watch. I feel terrible for people who are going to experience pain, but I also believe that's the only way we can get to the other side. We've got to get to the other side, which is an honest monetary system that's deflationary. I mean, systems, economic systems provide outcomes for all the people who participate in them. And for that to happen, you need to have fair pricing, you need to have fair interest rates, you need to have a system that's based on fairness. And when you have that, everyone works in a way that's coordinated that makes all of our lives better. Yeah. And when you send fake signals, you make malinvestments and you do the wrong stuff. And so people are getting poorer, people are paying more for their food, people are hurting. I see it. I see it in interactions I've had just around the United States. I can just tell people are hurting. They lash out at each other. And that's all occurring because this money is broken. And so, break the money, mess up the incentives, mess up the interest rates, have the whole damn thing be broken. And guess what? We are all going to get poorer. Yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate to have lived in a generation where I'm living as well or better than my grandparents did. But if we don't change this, my grandkids aren't going to have that same experience. It's going to be substantially different for them because they are going to get relatively poor because we've misallocated the seed corn that we've got. We're eating it, we're wasting it, we're doing stupid stuff with it.
Yeah.
And that the only way to change that is to fix the monetary system. I mean, and I didn't coin this. I just saw it and I adopted it. I mean, I truly, and I know you believe this too, fix the money, fix the world, right? That's what we got to do.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
No, it's brilliantly said. And your friend said it one way. I heard Rothbard say that war is health of the state.
Yes. Same idea.
Yeah. So it's like, I mean, that is the business model actually. And I mentioned this yesterday, John 10:10.
Yeah.
The enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. I find it interesting that more people, specifically Christians, don't look at government with an objective eye. And it's like, okay, what is this business engaged in?
Right.
It's killing,
Right.
it's stealing, and it's destroying. That's literally all it does. It doesn't do anything else.
Well, it's transferring value. It also, that's destroying. That's fair enough. But they transfer value, right? They take money out of one pocket and put it into another.
Yeah, stealing, right?
Stealing. Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Yeah.
And I'm Rothbardian in my views here that taxation and inflation is all just theft.
Yep.
Doesn't do anything else.
That's right.
It's just an involuntary exchange of value.
Yeah.
And so there's something here that I keep trying to get on. It's like almost like the technological realities that we inhabit determine our psychological realities.
Yes.
And this is where I'm like back to the indispensability of Bitcoin. It's like if we don't have a form of property that's independent of the state, that the state cannot violate or inflate, then we're going to be stuck in this cycle of state worship or nationalism or whatever you want to call it, where we always are blaming Putin or this guy or this guy or that guy.
Absolutely.
When in reality, we've poured ourselves into a deceptive system. It's self-destructive from a human perspective.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely right. I mean, the fact that the system exists outside of any human being's desire and is mathematically based is just the beauty and the incredible importance of this innovation. And when you combine it with the internet and the fact that the narratives are crumbling because everyone can find the truth or more of the truth on the internet, I mean, I love the way, and whether people love him or hate him, I love the fact that Joe Rogan is giving the mainstream media a real run for their money. Yeah, because he's listening to other points of view. Yeah, and so are lots of people in this country, and they see it, and they're like, "This is wrong. What we are doing is wrong." I mean, what I find sad is when the blue guy's angry at the red guy and saying, what you're doing is wrong, and when the red guy's, no, you're both wrong.
Right, right.
You're all wrong. You gotta, you gotta jump above that level, right?
Yes, exactly.
You got to jump above that level. Don't let them suck you into, the day to day over, some little thing. Jump above it and say you both are wrong. This whole system is broken, and we need to fix the system, right?
Yeah, and I'm with you on I tend to take an apolitical tact on most things. I actually think the left versus right is kind of a false dichotomy.
Totally.
What's real in the real world is real individuals.
Yes. Against
collective
it's
useful
Hegelian.
fictions.
I mean, they're trying to get us to fight with each other.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's right.
And so is there a psychosis then? Okay. The theory I've been working with is if property can be violated, or let's say to the extent which property can be violated, we are more likely to be embroiled in this mass psychosis of politics.
Yes.
But to the extent property cannot be violated, it's like, what's the point in comparing our opinions? Like, I'm just going to go over here with my things. You go over there with your things. There's nothing to fight about.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, yes, because a lot of politics ultimately does come down to the money. And, if the government is sugar daddy and handing out stuff, in an unfair way, everybody's going to argue like crazy about how it gets handed out.
Right.
And, if they're not handing out stuff, if the money is inviolable, if the record is immutable, then, what are they going to do?
There's nothing to hand out.
There's nothing to hand out.
So there's nothing to fight about.
There's nothing to fight about. Well, that's right. I mean, there will be things to fight about, but
of course,
but they won't. I don't think the fights won't be nearly as contentious as they are right now.
And then people won't have such an emphasis on the political aspects of their identity at both the individual and group level.
Well, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it'll be very scary for some people though, because some people want to turn themselves over to some larger, greater collective. I mean, they want to believe a narrative. They want to be led to greatness. They want, they have fantasies. I mean, we're all susceptible to mass psychosis. We're all susceptible to fantasies. And, the German people were a very, very civilized people. They were, among the most civilized in the world. And yet they all adopted a mass psychosis in the 30s that, led to the slaughter of 6 million Jews and a world war that slaughtered many more people. And so, it's a very slippery slope and a very dangerous issue, right?
Yeah. And I talked to Malone about this actually a little bit, the mass psychosis. And one of the things he said was just having talked about it, like giving people the lexicon or term to refer to this phenomenon that we're all susceptible to was very empowering, right?
Yes.
To just be able to step outside of it and be like, okay, this is something that can happen to me.
Oh yeah.
It just gives you the tool to deal with it more appropriately.
Yeah. I mean, William Mackay wrote a book back in the 1800s, popular delusions and the madness of crowds.
Right.
And it chronicled the Dutch tulip thing. It chronicled the French John Law episode. And what do they say? Men go mad in crowds and collectively,
right?
And they regain their senses one by one.
Yeah.
And when reality comes roaring back, and I think we're in the regaining our senses piece right now, and it's because to me it's very, very obvious that fiat is failing.
Yes.
I mean, I have very little doubt in this, and I've really stuck my neck out because I could look like a total idiot and I could be completely wrong, but I sincerely believe that we have a hyperinflationary future coming at some point, outside, 18 years. And that's just because I'm saying that there's some fourth turnings that have lasted 30 years. And I think this one started in 2018. But I think more likely within 10 years. Because this monetary system is designed to fail. It has to fail.
Right.
And, there are just a few more steps left before it does. And things are happening more quickly.
Now, okay, so let's
Want to go there?
let's point on that because I actually agree with you. I have a public prediction that the U.S. dollar is hyperinflated by 2035.
I agree with that.
And it's based on some other
right.
rates of hyperinflation historically, just kind of layered together. It's an estimate, so who knows? But here's what I want to ask about is, well, first of all, I assume you would agree that fiat currency inflation is a violation of private property.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's theft.
So if the psychosis is related to the rate at which we're violating private property, should we expect the mass psychosis to escalate as we print more fiat going into that hyperinflation?
Absolutely.
So things are going to get darker before
Sadly,
dawn.
I think they will. Sadly, I think they will. I mean, things are already pretty dark. I mean, it's, you and I have food on the table, right? Yep. You're lower middle income and your gasoline's now $6. Your food's more expensive.
Yeah.
Your wages are going up at 5% a year. You're scared. Your medical care is totally out of control. I mean, you're scared, and you should be. And it's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just ridiculous, honestly, because even if you're rich, right? Whatever, top 1%, 0.1%, whatever. If the market self-destructs in a hyperinflation, everyone's suffering.
Well, that's
right?
the point. I mean, so you're worth $80 billion.
Yeah.
But all your employees hate you because you won't let them go to the bathroom, during their work shift. I mean, really? Really, Jeff? I mean, is that really how you want to run your company? I mean, I just, it's stunning to me. Don't get me started. Don't get me started. Some of the elites, the behavior of some of the elites. I mean, the nobility in France in 70 and 89, had nothing on these folks.
Yeah. So, okay. Maybe we'll just take a couple steps back. Things are pretty bleak. Looks like they might get bleaker. Where should we be? Like through the lens of libertarian philosophy, which I guess Bitcoin is almost like a forcing function for that.
Absolutely.
It's like Austrian economics was kind of this philosophical debate with
Right.
Keynesian economics, but Bitcoin now makes it like a market test kind of thing.
Yes.
How do you think the world could look in a libertarian, Bitcoin-friendly world?
Oh, it could be.
Do you think I assume, I mean, obviously, who knows, but in the ashes of this hyperinflation that you and I anticipate, something like Bitcoin should also rise. So there's a very bright future beyond this middle ground that we don't know, is very uncertain. How do you consider that, think about that, explain that?
So I think your generation, the Jack Mallers, the Marty Bents of the world, are going to be the hero generation that fixes this broken world. And I've studied a lot of hyperinflations, and they're horrible, right? They're horrible for wealth holders, particularly. They're actually somewhat less horrible for somebody in the middle of their career who has a good skill.
Right.
I mean, you're a plumber.
Yeah.
You have a house, you have a mortgage, you don't have a ton of savings, currency gets wiped out. Well, guess what? People still need to have their toilets fixed.
Right.
Right. Everything reprices. You still got your house. You didn't lose it. Life goes on.
Yeah.
And in the history of hyperinflations, when you return to sound money, things reorganize pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Who loses? Bondholders. The mega rich, they lose a lot.
Yeah.
And perhaps they should. Yeah. I mean, they've created a lot of fiat at the expense of a lot of other people, and if they haven't been wise enough to put it in things that are sound money, they're going to lose it.
Yeah.
And so be it. I think we have a new political system that is much more libertarian, much more smaller, much more local. I think everyone is very, very terribly angry about what happened to them. I wouldn't want to be a politician. I mean, history is not going to be kind to any of these people. I mean, these are going to be the people who destroyed the old system. They're going to try and have a narrative that defends themselves, but everyone's going to see it. Everyone's going to see it, and we're gonna have term limits. We're gonna, I hope the United States holds together, but it might not.
Yeah.
It might become more regional or more state-based. But I think what needs to happen is that people need to go back to the original concept of what a government should be. And my belief, and I think the libertarian belief, is that a government really just needs to be a fair referee in a game. That everyone more or less, prevent the known crimes, prevent murder, prevent theft, prevent, all the obvious things. I mean, just the 10 Commandments, have a system of courts and, police officers that, keep the game fair. And other than that, stay out of the way. Maybe to the degree there are foreign threats, maybe there needs to be some form of military, but, I think appropriately, I think maybe in 50 or 100 years, that could all be dialed down too.
Yeah.
Where you get every country, I mean, there could be broad agreement that nuclear weapons don't serve anybody in the human race,
right.
And so those could be abolished. You could have a case where, you have a very, very peaceful world. I see that. I think that will happen. I'm not sure it'll happen in my lifetime. I'm pretty sure most of that will happen in your lifetime, because we reached peak centralization. We got really good. I mean, I always like to look at it. It started with Henry Ford in the assembly line, right? I mean, pre that, we were a bunch of farmers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And what the Industrial Revolution kind of showed us that, you put a bunch of people together and you organize them in a particular fashion, man, you can get a lot of output by dividing things up. And I mean, it's unbelievable.
The division of labor.
The division of labor.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing what happened. Yeah. And we just kept pushing that as hard and hard. And, sure enough, First World War came along and they thought, it'll be horse charges. Well, no, it turns out you can kill a lot of people with machinery too. And you got so forth. And then Second World War came along and holy crap, we can really kill a lot of people.
Yeah.
When we're big organizations. A nuclear bomb proves, guess what? We can even destroy the entire planet.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I think humankind generally is probably coming to the conclusion that's not a good idea.
Right.
Right. We need to back away from that and go in the other direction. And the beautiful thing is there are two parts to this revolution as I see it. I think the two biggest innovations in the last 25 years, in my view, are, well, three. The microchip, which created all the technology.
Yeah.
The internet, which took away the narrative function from the New York Times and allowed everybody to get information.
Yeah.
And now Bitcoin, which has basically taken away the monetary function from government. Yeah. I think those three things are going to vastly improve the world. And I think these big corrupt organizations, they're just all going to fail.
Right.
And it's going to happen. You say 35. I think that's the outside time frame. I think in the late 2020s, like 27, 26, 27, 28. And I think people are going to be surprised by it because think of how one day the Soviet Union and Eastern Germany were just this big, powerful, monolithic thing that we were terrified of, right?
Yeah.
The next day, poof, they're gone.
Yeah.
I mean, the U.S. federal emperor has got no clothes, right? I mean, I can see it. You can see it. Russia's calling him on it. Other people can see it. What happens when everybody just kind of decides, there are 90 of us for every 10 of you that are living in the government system. We're not going to play anymore.
Right.
We're just not going to play.
So, yeah. Yeah. Brilliantly said. You're bringing up some points here I want to double click on. So peak centralization, and now presumably the pendulum is going the other direction towards decentralization.
Right.
I talk a lot on this show about the sovereign individual thesis.
Yep.
I don't know if you
Yep, I've listened to it. Yeah, I know. And I'm very much in with being a sovereign individual.
Yeah. Do you prescribe to the idea that the very organizational model of the nation state itself could be, I don't, either dissolved or dramatically reformed as a result of this technological revolution?
At a minimum, dramatically reformed.
Yeah.
At a minimum. And yes, perhaps potentially dissolved.
Yeah.
I mean, borderless, et cetera. There's so much tradition and so much history. I think it's going to be in steps.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think we're going to go to that. Not in my lifetime.
Yeah.
But diminished. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, we're on the downswing.
Yeah.
And what I think will be very interesting to see is the way that certain nations adopt. Certain nations are going to look forward and certain nations are going to look backward.
Yeah.
And the looking forward nations are going to just kick ass.
Right.
Yeah. And it's going to become very apparent to everybody else that they're doing it.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to move in that direction or be left behind. That's the game theory, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's the migration, right? Talent, capital, and all that goes to where they're treated
all
best.
The talents, the capital's going to go where it's treated best. The talent's going to go where it's treated best.
Yeah.
And people are going to just demand it.
Yes.
That's the thing. I mean, part of what you got going on now is my generation, the boomers, are kind of hanging on to the privilege they've got.
Right.
But they're going to pass, and your generation is much more collective. I mean, the boomers were very selfish as a general rule, and your generation is much more concerned with the common good, not in a communistic sort of way, but just in a we've got to create something that works for everybody sort of way, right? Yeah. And I think that's going to become a much more prevalent thought pattern,
Now I'd like to tell you about a great new Bitcoin show on the scene that you've got to check out. Brought to you by Swan Studios and Bitcoin Magazine, this show is Hard Money with Natalie Brunell. Natalie is an Emmy-nominated journalist bringing unparalleled experience to the Bitcoin media scene. And personally, Natalie is one of my favorite voices in the Bitcoin space. Each week on Hard Money, you'll get the top headlines of the week with analysis you won't find anywhere else. Hard-hitting interviews with amazing guests like myself and other top minds in the Bitcoin space. And the show will take you directly into the lives being changed by Bitcoin all over the world. Check out Hard Money at swan.com/hardmoney. Today, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Crowd Health. So, how does health insurance work? You send an egregious amount of money to an insurance company. They hold it in a pool of depreciating fiat currency. Then, when you have a large health event, you have to pay them even more via your deductible. And then you hope they will cover your bill. And in fact, 1 in 6 bills are denied by healthcare.gov plans. It's time to take control of your own healthcare bills. I'd like to introduce you to Crowd Health. It's a decentralization of healthcare using Bitcoin as an alternative to health insurance. Instead of sending fiat currency to a big corporation, you send that money to an account controlled by you, a portion of which is converted into Bitcoin. Then, if you have a big health event, you have a community of Bitcoiners that will use the money in their accounts to help you out. To get more details, go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove, where you can find the promo code for $99 a month for 6 months.
I wonder, I'm clearly very libertarian, obviously, in a lot of this, but where I'm struggling now is like, what is the actual role of government? I mean, I heard you say earlier, you think we can have like a non-state society.
Yeah.
that's very radical for a lot of people to accept or believe in that vision. Even myself, I'm like, well, maybe we go away from large states to very small micro states, which is kind of that sovereign individual thesis. And the only role I see for government is the preservation of physical property rights, right? Like their local security. And now you said earlier, person and property, and I put person and property under one rubric here. I had a guy here yesterday, we were talking about the Christian aspects of this, and he kept referring to Romans and how it describes the role of government, I think as the punisher of evildoers, something like that. I could be wrong about that, but what is the proper role of government in this libertarian future?
The word I used before was a fair referee. I mean, look, I wouldn't, there will always be psychopaths within the human population, right?
Right.
I would like to have a police force to track down and prevent us from getting slaughtered by psychopaths.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's clearly to me a role for for governments. I'm not sure they need to be big and national and say, we speak one way, you speak a different way. We're going to threaten you.
Right.
But I'm not sure I'd want to live in a society without police officers.
Yeah.
Without courts.
Right.
And without jails. I mean, I don't think the human condition is broadly evolved to a state where that would be a sensible thing for any of us.
You think all those are exclusively the purview of government?
I do, for now. I mean, maybe that's just the traditional thinking, and that's because it's what I've grown up with.
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps that's wrong. Perhaps that could all be done privately.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't dispute that's a possibility, but I do. I mean, I think that, yes, I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, consider a small society. I mean, don't you think most of the people in the society would say, look, let's create some laws that say, you're not allowed to kill people, you're not allowed to steal from people, and let's, have a court system and, a police force that enforces those laws.
Yeah.
I see that as being a very important role of government, but it stops there. I mean, it doesn't go much beyond that. It certainly doesn't get into foreign aid and, killing people in rice paddies and, a lot of the other things that these governments have done.
Yeah. No, I agree with that for sure. Well, I'd like to learn a little bit more.
We can go there.
Maybe about the Christian morality aspects,
Sure.
and then we can start going into.
It's pretty simple. It's just.
Well, I'm just interested to learn about where you're coming from.
It's just, thou shalt not steal, and honest weights and measures, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's both in the Bible. It's pretty clear. You start diluting the beer and charging the same amount for it.
I never heard it put like that.
That's theft.
Diluting the beer.
That's what they did. Or the wine. You start pouring water in the wine.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, this isn't hard. It's and they've been diluting it for a long time, and the dilution's getting worse and worse.
Absolutely.
The number I like to throw out. I mean, people say, and Bitcoin people, I love this fact. Okay, so Bitcoin people say, well, Bitcoin's going to come along, it's going to take away all of gold's monetary premium. Right? And I said, well, guys, there ain't nothing left to take. It costs $1,200 to mine an ounce of gold. You got to have capex, and you got to find new gold. We're selling it for $1,800, so we got $600 of profit.
Right.
That's not a lot of monetary premium.
Right.
When we were on a gold standard back in '71, earlier than '71 because we'd run up some debts from them, but you could take the amount of gold the U.S. theoretically has, divide it by the dollars outstanding, and you'd come up with the $35 that the standard was based on.
Right.
If you did the same math today, gold should be at $78,000 an ounce.
Right.
Gold's at $1,800 an ounce.
So
that's a monetary premium.
Let's tap on that. So is that coordinated gold price suppression in your estimation? Okay.
Yes.
Via the London gold pool?
That and a lot more than that. I mean, they've basically just psychologically demonetized gold.
Right. It's pretty incredible, actually.
It's been incredible.
Yeah.
They've printed so much money and gotten away with it.
Yeah.
All because of, Summers and Barsky and Gibson's paradox in the paper, and then what the LBMA did in the fractional reserve gold and all the gold derivatives. I mean, people don't understand how many derivatives there are out there surrounding the gold market and how they've used those to suppress the price. And actually, a lot of people also don't understand how that same thing could ultimately be done to Bitcoin. It has not been done yet, because if you go to Glassnode and you look at the amount of Bitcoin futures outstanding, it's trivial compared to the amount that trades. And so they haven't done it yet. But it doesn't mean it's not possible.
Right.
And so, in my view, part of the monetary reform we need is going to be to outlaw derivatives, and
Right.
just broadly, because futures were originally invented so that farmers, producers and users of commodities could hedge the risk of the price going up or down.
Right.
They've been massively abused,
Yes.
just massively abused to manipulate the prices.
So it's funny you bring this up. My first guest today, Sullivan, was saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Like we need to get rid of synthetics, as he calls them.
Absolutely.
But he's also a seriously libertarian guy. So my question to him is like, how do you reconcile that with your libertarian principles? Do we need a ban on this, or is it just hard money would kind of resolve this over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think hard money might naturally resolve it because nobody would give the credit necessary to let those
Right.
things exist
Yeah.
if the money were really hard.
Especially when self-custody is cheap and easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, just to be sure, I could make an argument that, we should outlaw that kind of behavior, because that really is fraud too, in the sense that you're selling something you don't have. And it goes back to an argument I made in a couple other podcasts about the notion of table stakes poker, which is, it doesn't actually translate perfectly to this, but in a game of table stakes poker, the biggest balance sheet can shove the price around because you can bluff.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what's
spoofing and all that.
And that's what's been going on.
Yeah.
And then in witness, like the LME, the nickel blow up in the LME, that's a perfect example of how they got called on the bluff, and of course the powers that be changed the rules.
Right. He talked about that too.
Yeah.
So,
it's ridiculous, right? They did it to me in 2008, and they outlawed the banning of short selling of financials. So look, the fiat people have a set of principles that they use to keep the fiat system going. And in the gold space, the derivatives have suppressed the gold price massively.
Yes.
Massively.
So you might appreciate this.
Yeah.
The name of the guy that said it escapes me at the moment, but the quote is, "Sovereign is he who decides the exception."
Yes.
And that is the essence of this whole fiat construct, is that there are no constant rules.
Yes.
There are rules for thee, none for me, type of thing.
Two sets of rules.
And there's so much mutability in the rules. They're constantly changing.
Yes.
And that if you can ever get on the side of the trade that you control the rules, that's equivalent to the power to win in perpetuity.
That's right.
If I can make the rules, I can win the game every time we play.
That is exactly what's going on.
So what you need to do, this is what gold basically was, right? Was rules nobody could change. That's why it was desirable as money.
Yes.
And that's what Bitcoin is, right? The game that is totally immutable, fixed rules.
That's exactly what is going on.
Yeah.
And, and the people who run the fiat system in the world today, that's why they're so upset by what Putin just did.
Right.
Obviously they're upset for the illegal war and the killing of people, but I think at their soul and deep down, they're really more upset because what Putin has done is he said, our commodity's your problem.
Right.
You can do this paper thing all you want, guys, but guess what?
We own the underlying.
Yeah, we got the underlying. We got the physical. Unless you're willing to buy rubles or sell us gold or send us gold, you ain't getting the gas, Germany. You're going to freeze.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
It's an amazing, I have to say, what occurred in the last month to me in the world I'm in is just like it's an earthquake.
Can you unpack this? Because I don't know a ton about it, and I'm sure the audience doesn't either.
So I'd be happy to. So really quick history, okay. Gold standard until arguably 1944. Credit got in there in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, but let's say gold standard until 44, okay. Bretton Woods conference, post end of World War II, we got to have a new monetary order. How are we going to set this thing up? Okay. All right, let's make the dollar world's reserve currency. Let's fix other currencies to the dollar. Let's tie the dollar to gold. U.S. won the war, had the biggest military, was a net, we had the only industrial base. Germany and Japan were on their knees. And, we've got X amount of ounces of gold. We got Y amount of dollars outstanding. Divide the two, it's $35. Boom. So you got a sound money system in theory. Right. Okay, 1945. Bretton Woods won. Okay. Worked fine for a while. And then what happened is the U.S. started to abuse the privilege. Okay.
Of course.
53 was the first time, I was saying earlier, from 45 to late 50s, we ran surplus as often as we ran deficits, and the deficits were small. But big one in 53 for the Korean War. Late 50s, we start doing stuff in Vietnam. Early 60s, we start spending more on military, and we suddenly start to abuse the creditworthiness of the dollar because our government's running net deficits, and they're getting bigger consistently. Foreign creditors are saying, hey, hang on a second. You're printing money. You're spending more than you've got. You're printing money to cover the difference. We don't like that. Yeah, you've got this dollar exchange standard. Guess what? We'll send our excess dollars. We've been shipping you a lot of things. We'll send our excess dollars over. You send us gold. U.S. gold supplies got drawn down substantially from 600,000 ounces to 260,000 ounces, something like that. The French were the leaders in this because de Gaulle had a smart economist who was kind of Austrian in thought pattern, a guy named Jacques Rueff, and they said, "Give us the gold." Nixon looks and sees all the gold going out the door, realizes it's strategic, we need it, says, "Okay, this isn't going to work. I'm going to shut the gold window." That's August 15, 1971. He shuts the gold window. Bretton Woods II is born. Okay, the dollar, we effectively defaulted. I mean, everyone says, well, the U.S. has never defaulted. And I said, bullshit. We totally defaulted versus foreigners in 1971. It was a full-out default. It wasn't a U.S. default, but it was a foreign default. And the U.S. it didn't matter because people couldn't own gold because Roosevelt had banned it. Okay, so now we're on Bretton Woods II. And by the way, that happened in 71. Gold was at 35. Next 10 years, gold went to 800. And that's because everyone realized the dollar was getting debased enormously. Right. Okay. By the way, at 800, we were almost back on a gold standard, but that's a different matter. We're now in Bretton Woods II. At the same time, Henry Kissinger brilliantly figured out that oil was the most important commodity in the world, energy-based form of money, if you will. He went to Saudi Arabia. They had security issues. He said, I'll do a deal with you. We'll give you security. We've got great military. We'll give you security cover. You have to sell your oil in dollars, and then you'll recycle those dollars back into our banking system. The petrodollar was born, Bretton Woods II. Right. Dollar recovered. Volcker came in, put in high interest rates. He, got the gold thing under control. And even Volcker in his memoirs said, the biggest mistake we made in the 70s was letting the gold price get out of control the way we did. Okay, implying that they were controlling it, and there was a London gold pool that had blown up, and that's part of the story. I've kind of skipped over. It's not important. Anyway, now we're in Bretton Woods II, the petrodollar. Okay. So that's 1971 to present, okay? And, as Luke Groman has pointed out, the dollar kind of fluctuated between, a certain level vis-a-vis oil over that time period. A lot of good deflationary things happened. I mean, the microchip came along and brought down the cost of everything. 1 billion people in China entered the world's productive workforce and made a lot of stuff cheap. Bonds were falling because Volcker had pushed interest rates up so high that there was a positive real rate of interest. So we got on this enormous deflationary trend, which I think has run its course. Right. I mean, when you have negative yielding bonds and you have, just the incredible debt, relative to GDP or anything else, just outstanding levels that have never been seen before. The only other time they'd been seen before was World War II. It's a pretty extreme situation. That changed. It started changing with COVID and the money printing that came as a result of COVID. And what I think is going on here is, the Fed is like the drunk that just can't stop drinking, and so the solution to every problem is to print more money, and it has to be because the money is needed to service the existing debt. Right. And the GDP has not grown at the same rate at which the debt has grown, and that ultimately becomes a problem unless your interest rates are zero, and they basically are zero. But as a result of all of that, the Fed is now trapped in a position where they have to keep printing money, but they've also got runaway inflation. Right. And what triggered that was the COVID printing and then the geopolitical move by Putin, where he basically said, yeah, this paper stuff, I don't buy it. And he knew about the gold scheme. He knew about the paper gold. He went to the GATA conferences. He sent a representative who I've read the editorials this guy has written. He went to the GATA conferences. GATA is the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. It's GATA.org. Bill Murphy and Chris Powell. These guys are going to be heroes someday. Yeah. And they basically have documented all the suppression scheme. And he knows that, it's all paper. Yeah. That the power of the West is based on a paper credit system, and that system, he's saying bullshit. I call, show me the underlying, right? I got the underlying. You want the oil, you want the wheat, you want the natural gas, Germany. Show me the real stuff. All right. And to me, that's just an accelerant to what we now call Bretton Woods III. And it's being called Bretton Woods 3 by kind of the most brilliant monetary analyst out there, a guy named Zoltan Posner in New York, who writes for Credit Suisse. And he's saying the world is shifting from outside money, or from inside money to outside money. And you see this in two big signposts that happened recently that I think you see this through. One, notice how when the truckers decided to protest up in Canada, right? Pierre Trudeau says, I'm going to freeze all the bank accounts of those truckers and anyone who supported them.
Right.
Well, what's that all about? Where did due process of law go there, right?
Right.
Then Russia decides to illegally and aggressively, invade Ukraine. I'm not endorsing any of that, but they decide to do that. And the U.S. says, fine, we're going to shut you out of SWIFT. And not only that, but we're going to grab your foreign currency reserves.
Right.
Whoa.
Which was $600
billion. Whoa. There's $12 trillion of foreign currency reserves out there floating around.
Yeah.
The U.S. doesn't like you and they can just grab your foreign currency reserves?
Right.
Holy cannoli. Do I really need to keep my money in U.S. dollars in the U.S. banking system? Right. Or should I have some money that's quote unquote outside the system without counterparty risk? What two forms of money are there that fulfill that? Gold and Bitcoin. Right? I mean, both of these actions were like an advertisement for Bitcoin, just a blatant advertisement. And every single large money manager and sovereign wealth manager and country manager in the world is sitting there in shock today saying, oh my goodness, the U.S. is not playing by the rules. It's, as you say, they make their own rules when it suits them. If you can change the rules of the game, you're always going to win. Okay, fine. Except when you actually need the underlying natural gas or your people freeze, right? And so Putin has actually made a chess move that puts the Western paper system in great jeopardy, And the only real solution they have, and they can't go backwards. They can't do a Volcker and push interest rates up and try and make the money sound again, because 20% interest rates, the whole world will go bankrupt, right?
Because of the debt levels.
Yeah, because of the debt levels. Yeah. And so, this isn't 1979 when debt was 30% of GDP back then. Right. It's 130% now, right? So as a result of that, they've got no choice but to continue printing.
Wow.
And so here's what triggers hyperinflation in my book. Okay, and this is really important to understand. I've read the books about it, and if you look at Reinhard and Roger, they have the authoritative book on it. What it is hyperinflation gets triggered when enough people within the population realize that there's absolutely no way that the authorities can go backwards. In other words, they understand they're trapped and they know that money printing is a policy, and it's a policy, and Hayek and von Mises talked about this as well, and it's a policy that cannot be reversed.
It's a psychological threshold.
Yes, and so when we get enough people who have crossed that threshold and go, oh my God, they are going to dilute this money from now until the point at which it's worthless, then what happens is what we all know as Gresham's Law, Sir Thomas Gresham in the 1500s, and that is good money shoves out bad. And so everybody, the minute you get your money, you're like, well, shit, I'm not keeping it in dollars, and I'm not keeping it in bonds. Maybe I'll keep it in stocks if I think they're going to be good in 30 years. But I'm going to take that money, I'm going to go buy something.
Right.
I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to buy a car, I'm going to buy gold, I'm going to buy Bitcoin, I'm going to buy something that I know cannot be debased.
Right.
And when enough people reach that point, it's all over.
It's self-fulfilling.
It's self-fulfilling. The currencies, because it's a rush for the exits.
Yeah.
You realize that, you better get that thing before somebody else gets it, or you're going to end up, the paper ticket that's called $100, that's going to be a monopoly ticket.
Yeah.
So you better spend it on something while you can, before it becomes a monopoly ticket. Right?
It's a game of hot potato that's accelerating.
It's a very rapid game of hot potato, or musical chairs, right? And you're just like, I got to get a chair. Yeah. So, that's to me where we're going. The rate at which we get there, it's hard. There'll be a lot of moves and counter moves, and there's a lot of volatility, right?
That's so interesting. So inside money would be inside the fiat currency complex.
Correct.
Outside is counterparty free money.
Exactly.
Gold or Bitcoin.
Exactly right. Those are the two. And to a degree, commodities. Because commodities aren't perfect money, right? But oil, wheat.
But they
steel.
Can't be debased. There's a proof of work underlying their existence.
You don't get them for free,
right?
You just don't get them for free. You don't get oil unless you explore and pull it out of the ground.
Right.
You don't get wheat unless you plant and harvest.
Right.
It's real stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
It's amazing. So this whole illusion,
all the paper stuff,
is just going to evaporate.
It's just going to blow up.
Wow.
It's just going to be gone.
This freezing of bank accounts is so interesting.
Right.
Like, it's one thing to see it. I agree with you, by the way, that it's Justin Trudeau freezing the bank accounts of peaceful protesters and then labeling them domestic terrorists is a symptom of this fiat nonsense.
Of course it is. Well, or even somebody, even if you weren't a protester, but you supported them.
Yes.
You said, I'm generally sympathetic to that cause. I'll send them $25.
Right.
You can freeze your bank account?
Right.
Oh, please.
Right. It's, it's not even private property at that point. So it's highlighting to the world, to your point, that money in the bank is not your money.
Correct.
Right? It's at the leisure of the state or whatever authority can turn it off.
That's exactly right.
Again, if we're talking about that sovereign is he who decides the exception, there's a group sitting above you that can take exception to your ownership of that money.
Exactly.
Right. So you are not sovereign. You are
right.
You are in servitude to some extent to the group that can
Absolutely.
that can take exception to your property. So that's one level, right? That's a big. But then, and this blew my mind. Russia having the 600 plus billion frozen and censored. That's at an entirely new level. And these things are essentially back to back, right? This is like a couple of months apart.
Right.
My mind immediately goes to, what is China thinking?
What does India think?
What are they thinking when they see that once they see the U.S. flexing that exception, right? And basically going against the sovereignty of Russia, right? Russia had no sovereignty in that money.
That's right.
Basically, because the U.S. can take exception to it.
That's right.
And so all of these things, as you said, you called it a billboard for Bitcoin and
gold.
And what I would say there is like, the power of Bitcoin could be described through this lens is like, it's the only monetary database in the world that no one can make an exception to.
Correct.
Like if you hold your keys, you hold your coin, there's no permission.
12 words,
no
and
stopping
you're
it.
self-sovereign.
No exceptions.
And no exceptions.
And all of these acts of censorship, of exceptionalism, whatever you want to call it, it's pushing people over time into this exception-proof database we call Bitcoin.
Correct.
And I'm just still, like, even to say it right now, I'm blown away that this is real. Like, this has happened so quickly.
Oh, me too. I mean, I believed in my investment thesis strongly before anything that has happened in the last 3 months happened. Mm-hmm. But when I saw what happened with the Canadian truckers, small example, but Russia, I was just like, oh my God. Yeah. I mean, this is huge. And a lot of people say to me, well, okay, great. How come gold hasn't gone up? How come silver hasn't gone up? How come Bitcoin's not 150? Yeah. Give it some time. Yeah. I mean, it takes time for people to absorb these things and to understand them, and for investment committees. I mean, we're now at the stage where it takes big money to move these markets. Yeah. I mean, us plebes aren't going to, buying a couple of coins here and there. We're not going to move these markets. I mean, we need large institutional, and large sovereign players and large billionaire type people to start to feel the fear and the pain and come in. And, they're all being briefed on this right now. Right. And I can just say from the few that I have interacted with, they've all come to the conclusion like, you know what, they don't want to, and they've generally looking at me and hearing my pitch, they don't want to hear it. They're in denial. They don't want to hear it. They, I'm a crank. They're like, you've been saying this for years. Yeah, okay, Larry, you got this libertarian fantasy, blah, 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 right? But you know what they're doing now? They're kind of like, well, maybe just in case I need a little allocation over there. Right, yeah. Just in case. Right. And that's the crack. Yes. Because I think everyone listening would agree that you buy a little Bitcoin, you get to know it, you see the price move, you understand it more, you read about it more. Yeah. You buy some more. Yes. And pretty soon, you're outright, pretty soon you're full-fledged orange pill, trying to convince all your friends and neighbors to save themselves. Yes. Right? And that's 100%. And that's how it happens. Yeah. That's exactly how it happens. And it's so interesting that I get that critique a lot as well. Libertarian fantasy. Right. And it's like, okay, just think about it very objectively. Counterparty risk. Yeah. Just start and stop at counterparty risk. Yeah. Like, isn't it clear that it's in every individual, every institution, every nation state's economic interest to hold their wealth in something that's immune to the opinions of counterparties? Yes. I mean, you could just leave it at that, and it's like, okay, gold and Bitcoin. What else is there? Seems clear to me, but a lot of people don't understand the immutability. A lot of, there's, you get a lot of the Facebook, MySpace argument. Mm-hmm, there's gonna be another one that'll be better. I've counted that a lot. Yeah. And I'm like, I counter with, the Metcalfe's law of the network effect. I mean, look, somebody earlier I was listening to said people have a hard time understanding exponential numbers. And I think people have one of the great mistakes I've made as an investor, and I confess this, I made lots of mistakes. One thing is I thought gold was going to the moon in 28, and it did for a while, and then it didn't. Lost a lot of money. But one of the other great mistakes I made post 08, and I was a big investor in the internet in the early days, made a lot of money there, was I missed the value of networks and how networks don't grow linearly, they grow geometrically in value.
Right.
And so I was smart enough to look at Amazon, and I was smart enough to look at Facebook, and I was smart enough to look at Google and all the network-based businesses out there. And and eBay, I participated in that one, but and I never could get there based on the valuation. I was kind of like, Jesus, Amazon, yeah, it's a good business, it's growing, the trend is there, but it's not making any money.
Right.
And the multiples are crazy, and I didn't understand the way value accretes and compounds when you get a network that more or less just sucks everybody in. You have to either play or be left behind.
Almost like a natural monopoly.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It is a natural monopoly. I mean, it's like, if you want to do a search, you're going to use Google. You're not going to go to Bing.
Right.
I mean, and so these networks, and so they all, I mean, if you look at the stock performance of all of those companies in the past 10 years, it's just been lights out, just absolutely lights. I missed all of them.
Yeah.
And so when Bitcoin came along in 2013, I could see it was the same sort of thing. I said, what, I'm not going to miss this one. Yeah. It's the same idea. It's just applied to money.
Yeah.
And, and it's at the next layer up.
Yeah.
And so people say, well, yeah, but the transactions are expensive. What happens when the mining reward's gone? I'm like, that's why Jack Mallers lives. I mean, lightning's going to fix all that. Yeah. At least that's my belief.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So it's, to me, I've never seen such an asymmetric bet, and I'm absolutely sure it's going to ultimately replace gold. The only place I take issue with Michael Saylor is I don't think gold is its enemy. I think gold is a friend, because we're all, the common enemy is destroying the fiat system. And you want anything going, you want to move as much capital as you can into sound money, because that drains the fiat system. That's what you want to have happen.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of boomers who sadly don't fully understand Bitcoin, and therefore they're not going to embrace Bitcoin. So you get them hooked on, you get them in the entry drug, the gateway drug, which is gold, right? And then once they're a gold holder, then you just try and show them, okay, you hold gold, you understand why, because they're printing money and it's being debased. Bitcoin's just a better form of gold. Yeah. And let me tell you why. And initially they're skeptical, but ultimately I've migrated tons of my clients who were anti-Bitcoin into Bitcoiners. And I went to a gold conference. I gave a big speech about a year ago. We asked. I mean, these are old people in general. I mean, the gold bugs in general are an older crowd, right? 40 to 80, and so that's what the audience was. Probably a lot of 60 and 70-year-olds. And they asked the question: how many of you guys own Bitcoin? Half the hands went up. So right, impressive, right? So people. Gold people get it. I mean, they certainly get the Austrian piece of it. Yes. Right? They just need to be convinced this isn't some toy. And a lot of them have been turned off by all the scams and the shit coins and the Doge. And, and I understand that. I mean, they look at that and they go, hey, this is pump and dump bullshit. And I say, you're right. That is all pump and dump bullshit, except this one piece of code which solved a problem, the Byzantine generals problem that nobody else has solved. Right. And therefore, you got to understand this thing. Yes, because it's going to ultimately replace gold.
I've a lot of feedback from my audience has been the most effective form of orange pilling they ever received is me going to the beginning of money. What is money? The properties of money. The reason gold was desired. Right. And then once you have that lens, you're like, oh, gold was the most divisible, durable, recognizable, portable, scarce thing we had. And then you take that same lens and apply it to Bitcoin. It's obvious almost at that point. Right. It's like this thing takes everything gold did.
And it's verifiable.
Perfects it in a way.
Exactly.
Almost.
More easily transferable, et cetera. Yeah.
And it's just interesting about Bitcoin because it's like you're looking at this thing, it's brand new, it's a modern innovation, but that's not where you need to start actually. You need to forget about all that, go back to the beginning of time. Right. Work your way through this history, and then look at that innovation with fresh eyes, and you can get it. Right.
That's exactly right.
What you brought up something there, the Byzantine generals problem, which a lot of people perhaps don't understand. This idea that we were never able to propagate a message through inherently antagonistic parties, right? Parties that we can't trust. Right. And get the message out with high fidelity out the other end. That was an unsolved computer science problem, basically. And that's what Bitcoin is.
That's what proof
It's
of
a
work
solution
did.
to that.
Yeah, it solved it.
You might appreciate that. This came up from a few conversations I had, but the idea that the only way to stop Bitcoin is for actually nation states themselves to solve their own Byzantine generals problem, right? They all need to coordinate in a trusted way, all of them, with no defectors, is the only viable geopolitical strategy to stop Bitcoin.
I think that's right.
But so they would need to solve, nation states would need to solve the Byzantine generals problem to stop the solution to Byzantine generals problem.
I think that's right. And I think, you know, and thank God that the governments we have are stupid enough that they didn't squash it in its youth.
Right.
That they ignored it and they let it get this far because, in my opinion, the horse is out of the barn.
Yeah.
And nation states, some have tried to squash it, right? China's trying. How's that working out?
Right.
I mean, there's still some of it going on there. And, you know, my view is that, you know, obviously China and Russia are making the bet that, I mean, we're in a monetary crack-up boom, right? And we're in you know, the money is failing. This is a once-in-a-100-year event, right?
Mises called this.
Yeah, it's called it, right? It's coming. And they know it. So it's going to be a great monetary reset. We can all see that coming. And Russia and China are betting on gold.
Yeah.
You know, they've clearly made that bet. Probably China more than Russia, obviously, because Russia, you know, I saw that Gazprom was actually mining some Bitcoin. But, you know, so they've made the bet on gold. The U.S. has a wonderful opportunity to leapfrog both of those and go to Bitcoin as our monetary standard, which is why I hope Jason Lowery succeeds in convincing the Pentagon that that's the right thing to do, right?
I completely agree. What do you think about, because it seems like the U.S. is in such a unique position with the global reserve currency that they could actually, the U.S. could accumulate Bitcoin now quietly.
Absolutely.
And then could almost induce hyper-Bitcoinization. Right. And maybe even, I don't know, via the SWIFT network or its global reach, also probably sell Bitcoin to a lot of these countries.
Possibly. Yeah.
It's in such an advantageous position of like limited to no downside because you're just printing money to buy the thing.
Yeah. That's
so you have no cost effect. I mean, you're exporting a lot of that cost, right? If it's just inflation, you can export a lot of that to the world, but you have potentially unlimited upside with being in prime position on the Bitcoin network in terms at the geopolitical scale. What do you think about that?
I think it's fabulous. I think it's correct, and I think they should do it. I just don't think that the politicians, I mean, the Pentagon, there might be people in there who are smart enough and get it and realize that that's what we should do, that that's a leapfrogging move over China. Okay? But think about it from the politician's point of view. I mean, you know, the Winklevi are going to be the two richest people in the country. You know, Warren Buffett's not going to be. Bill Gates is not going to be. I mean, you know, I greatly fear that, you know, part of what bothers a lot of people in government about, you know, them seeing Bitcoin win is that they know that a lot of people who own Bitcoin are going to be very, very wealthy and very, very powerful. And they don't want to see that happen. I mean, I think, you know, sadly, I think between now and when we get back to sound money, because I've seen it in some of the statists saying it, you know, they're going to try and blame this monetary system failure on gold and Bitcoin holders.
They're going to blame everything.
You know, they're going to point fingers. Now, you know, hopefully, I think people are going to be smart enough to realize that the reason the currency failed is because they printed too much of it.
Yeah.
You know, I think the average person knows that. But, you know, sadly, I think we all have to be prepared for, you know, confiscation, capital gains taxes. I mean, these people have proven they will go as far as they have to go to protect their privilege. I mean, look at the look at the London Metals Exchange with nickel, look at the GameStop thing, look at the short selling ban in 2008. I mean, you know, this isn't going to be easy. I mean, they're going to come after us, which is why, you know, the 12-word self-sovereign, you know, is an important thing. And, you know, God knows there are going to be a lot of boating accidents. You know what I mean? I mean, there really are. Because you know, we got to kill this beast. I mean, we got to kill this fiat beast. And the fiat beast is going to work to preserve itself. I mean, you look at the assignat and when it failed in France back in the 1789 period. I mean, they were basically putting, you know, gold holders under the guillotine. You know, you had to report your gold because you were obviously, if you're holding gold in favor of assignats, you were trying to beat the monetary inflation. If you didn't report it and they found you hadn't reported, they'd chop your head off. So, you know, I mean, governments don't give up what they've got without a struggle.
Right.
And sadly, and look at the people we've got in our government, these aren't necessarily good people.
Right.
I mean, they're not likely to sit there and say, you know, we kind of messed up this monetary system. We should probably try and fix it. Let's do a one-time reset. in a fair way and try and distribute things fairly and make the rules fair going forward. I mean, that's what an enlightened government would do. You know, what are the odds of our government doing that? I don't know. They're not great, right?
Yeah, I've lost, I think post-COVID, lost quite a bit of faith.
Right.
To see people eating up these narratives that are being fed to them.
Horrible.
And I'm like, I thought there was more critical thinking in the population.
Yeah,
but
sadly, there's not. And further sadly, you know, as people get more, as life becomes harder, as you have to work harder just to put food on the table and healthcare, and as you know, as your life becomes more difficult, you have less time to do the research and to do the critical thinking.
Yeah.
You know, it's sad.
Because your time is being stolen via inflation.
Because your time is being stolen, through the fiat. Yeah.
Yeah, I hold out some optimism that, you know, conversations like this decentralized media dialogue thing, like, you know, you see the Joe Rogans of the world, as you said, competing with mainstream media. Hopefully it's waking up the right people, the right remnant, if you will.
It's going the right way, and this country is full of a lot of great people.
Yeah.
I really sincerely believe that. I'm not leaving. You know, I'm going to fight till the end. I think there are a lot, you know, leaders will emerge. I mean, Suarez will be president, in my view, one day, right? I mean,
let's hope so.
right? I mean, you know, we're going to have, I mean, the Bitcoiners are going to be very well to do.
Yeah.
We're going to have Bitcoiners in government. We've already got a few. We'll get more.
Yeah.
You know, so this is, you know, your generation is going to be the hero generation that fixes this broken system.
Every time you say that, I get chills. So
yeah, but
I'm taking it seriously.
But the sad thing is there's going to be, it's going to be rough. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. It's going to be rough.
For sure.
And that's why we got to try and help everyone around us. We got to orange pill as many people as we can.
Yeah.
We got to protect folks. And, you know, what I just hope is we can do it all without, you know, with all the death and killing. I mean, you know, we don't, I mean, generally speaking, fourth turnings have not occurred without a major war taking place.
Right.
You know, maybe we can break a trend here. You know, maybe we can break a trend. I sure hope so.
Yeah, but
sure
it
hope
feels more like the American Revolution 2.0, right? Where
maybe.
Not to say, and when I say that, I don't mean the country necessarily, but the ethos and principles that America was founded upon, that it's separated from the tyranny of, you know, the British central bank largely.
Right.
That type of separation again, but at a global scale, or like global separation from central banking.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think, you know, if we can avoid a nuclear exchange with these two other nuclear powers, and you know, these, if the government fails, if it kind of wilts, so to speak, you know, new leaders will emerge.
Yeah.
And that's what we got to count on.
Yeah.
That the new leaders will then work to educate the masses of why the currency failed.
Yeah.
And instruct everybody on why we need a sound currency.
Yes.
And you know, we'll reset it, and things will get pretty good pretty quick, in my opinion, once we reset it.
Right. Yeah. And I like how you say here too that heroes will rise.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is very important. So in Bitcoin, there's this whole cultural norm of like kill your heroes, and in one way, I think maybe that's useful to some extent. But what I would say, it's not kill your heroes. Don't idolize your heroes. Right? But we need heroes. You need people to actually stand up against this nonsense.
Absolutely.
That's how anything gets done in history.
Absolutely.
So the idea of kill all your
call them
heroes,
just call them leaders.
Yeah.
I mean, some people maybe call the founding fathers, heroes, but I thought they were leaders. They were regular men who stepped forward and said, look, this isn't tolerable. We're not living underneath this rule. We're gonna try to create a better system.
Yes.
Right? And I think if you poll, this country, you would find, the country's so broken. 80% of this country wants term limits. We can't get it.
Right.
What kind of representative democracy is that?
Right.
That's bullshit.
Right.
This country, if somebody were to come forward and truly say, hell, they followed a guy who talked about draining the swamp, who, I got to be careful here because I'm sure there are people who support him, but who frankly is pretty flawed. But it just shows you how determined they were to anything other than the status quo, which is what Clinton represented.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So,
right.
And there'll be better versions of that guy coming, in my view, much better versions.
Yeah, and I really appreciate this conversation because we've got to talk about. It starts with talking about it, right? We've got to talk about the realities that we face.
Yep.
Talk about the work that needs to be done.
Yep.
What is the quote about evil happening when good men do nothing,
Absolutely.
say nothing. Like it's the time is now.
Well, that's right. And people say to me, well, what can I do? And I say, look, your first responsibility is to yourself and your family. So make sure you have a decent piece of your investments in sound money themes. The second thing is do everything you can to educate all your neighbors, all your friends. I mean, become a broken record. You know, my wife, we go to cocktail parties. My wife says, please don't talk about gold and Bitcoin. We need friends around here. And they're getting tired of hearing about it. And I'm like, I'm not stopping.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to keep talking about gold and Bitcoin because, to me, I mean, this is what I know. This is what I've studied. I've been fighting this battle long before Bitcoin existed, supporting Ron Paul and others. And to me, it's a battle worth fighting. I mean, I want my legacy to be that I fought hard for sound money. You know, I want my kids and my grandkids to recognize that that's what I did.
Amen to that.
You know,
Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. It was an honor to be with you. It really was.
Could you please let my audience know where they can find out more about you?
Yeah. So I have a website. All my newsletters are free. You can get on my mailing list for free. We won't spam you. It's EMA2, Edward Mark Alpha, the number 2.com. That's my firm. And then I'm on Twitter a lot. I'm a loudmouth, but I try to, anything related to sound money, I try to talk about it. And it's just my name on Twitter, Lawrence, at Lawrence Lepard. And I try to interact on, DMs and everything else. And if I can help people in any way, I'd like to do that. So
Thank you so much, Larry.
yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. It was an honor.
Same here.